Okay, welcome back. We needed to sort out our connection. Please bear with us. We really sometimes have it hard here in Africa. So I believe that today it's going to be a great time, as we go into this show today. Please just enjoy the show today. This is really going to be good. I tell you, I guarantee you. We'll be talking about important issues today. So please, right. Okay, so welcome back to the show. I'm David McQuell. Today we are talking about, again, as we have been doing the last few days, 2 days, leading Christian or leading influences on Christians' opinion. How do Christian opinion, how are they formed? And yesterday we looked at the fact that our opinions are formed by what we hear and where we receive our information. If you receive, for example, your information from the media, then whatever the editorial line of that media is, that is what you will think. And many Christians, we don't know better. In fact, many Christians shockingly look up to CNN, to BBC as the source of information. They are considered the experts, but are they truly representing your values, your interests? That's the question that should come to mind when someone becomes the main source of information. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 12, he said, be careful what you hear. Be careful what you hear. In other words, the source in which you get your information is very important. As a Christian, you should be careful what you hear, who is talking, who is saying what, and what's the motive behind what they are saying. And again, back in the book of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah speaking said, the servant of the Lord shall not act by hearsay. He shall not act by hearsay. Just because it is said does not mean. Many people really accredit the media as some great experts, and we have seen the media lie over and over and over and over. In fact, the media does not represent the values of the Christian. They don't represent, they are repulsive. They are hostile to our values. And always they consider us as, it is shocking in recent times that the media even prefer Islam, that with all the suicide bombings and terror attacks happening every single day on earth by Muslims, the media really are very tolerant and respectful of Islam than Christianity. And how on earth can we rely on such kind of people to represent us or our values and to tell us things that will relate to our values? Absolutely not. And that really also raises an issue that I've been talking about for years. I have said that as long as the church, we don't have our own reputable media, we will always act on false information. We need to have reputable media, reputable in the sense that the media that tells the truth, not the media that decides what is the truth. The media that tells you the story, tells you what's happening, rather than the media that decides what you should know about what's happening. And so really, that's really important. And therefore, Christians, we have the responsibility to really, really, really pick. When you talk about experts, there are Christian experts on every subject. Many people don't know that. Many people don't know that. In fact, many people who know, despise Christian experts. They despise them. Why? Because the media despise them. And so we will try to bring out some Christian experts, some voices, of dissent in the Christian community or among Christians that we should actually listen to, rather than listen to a lot of people who don't represent us. For example, if you as a Christian listen to Dr. Anthony Fauci as your source of information on COVID, you will grossly be misled. You will be totally misled. You are lost, actually. You actually have no idea what's happening. These are corrupt men, evil men, men who are not representing the Lord, who have no concern, who have no regards for life. They are people who care about glory and care about money and fame. That's all. And you will be deeply lost if Dr. Fauci is your source of information on COVID. But yesterday we talked about people like Dr. Robert Malone. We talked about great people like Dr. Peter McCullough. Really, these are probably the most reputable people on earth concerning COVID. And people still don't know. And people still don't know about them. Christians have no idea who they are. Why? Because you will not hear about them on CNN. You will not hear about them on other. So you can go back to YouTube and watch yesterday's show. We talked about them, and we don't have enough time today. So today we are taking, in that dimension, we are taking the subject of global warming. And when we talk about global warming, or climate change rather, because, global warming failed them, so they changed the name to climate change. It was before, first of all, they were worried about global cooling. And then they got worried about global warming. Then they got worried about global cooling. Then they got worried about global warming. As the weather keeps changing, of course, the Bible says in Genesis chapter 9, I believe, Genesis chapter 9, when Noah came out of the ark, the Lord spoke to him and he said to him, as long as the earth remains, heat time and cold will never cease, summer and winter, rain season and dry season, and so right there you see climate change there. It's in the Bible, it's in the Bible. The Bible talks about it, but it's basically that's how God set the order. It's not human. It is not human activity that caused it. There has been flood in a time of Noah. Wasn't there a flood? What happened? Was it because the weather was hot? Was it because the weather that's reason? No, it wasn't, And so, I'm not a scientist, but I just gathered together the voices, Christian voices, and I'm going to be presenting that to you. I will not be arguing the facts. You will just listen to great Christian, God-fearing scientists debate about the issue. So, first of all, before we go there, I will first of all put up a man up on the screen. There is a man on the screen here that most people, if not most people, have no idea who he is. This is the former U.S. congressman who is called George Marsh. I believe George Marsh. George Marsh was born in 1801 and died in 1882. He is the first person, and he considered as the father of conservatism. Do you know that this climate change, global warming, was actually a virtue of conservatives? It was really brought to light by conservatives. And George Perkins Marsh is considered as one of the founding fathers of conservatism. He was a congressman from Massachusetts, and he was a congressman, sorry. He was a congressman, let me see where he is from, but he is the first person to introduce and predict and introduce the human-induced climate change. And from a speech that he gave in the University of Massachusetts, in 1847, I believe, somewhere in 1847, and here is what he said throughout his years. So it was what it describes. It describes him throughout his 80 years. Marsh had many careers as a lawyer, though by his own words, an indifferent practitioner. He was newspaper editor. He was a sheep farmer. He was a mill owner, a lecturer. He was a politician, a diplomat. He also tried his hand at various businesses, but fell miserable in all. Marble quarrying, railroad investment, wooden manufacturing. He studied linguistics, knew 20 languages, wrote a definitive book on the origin of the English language, and was known as the foremost Scandinavian scholar in North America. He invented tools and designed buildings, including the Washington Monument, as a congressman in Washington. Wow. Did you see that? He was the one that designed the Washington Monument. Oh my God. Great man. As a congressman in Washington in 1843 to 1849, Marsh helped to found and guide the Smithsonian Institution. He served as U.S. Minister to Turkey for 5 years, where he aided revolutionary refugees and advocated for religious freedom. He spent the last 21 years of his life, 1861 to 1882, as U.S. Minister to newly United Kingdom of Italy. So, a speech that he offered in the University of Massachusetts, which was Man and Nature, Physical Geography as Modified by Human Nature. He was the first person to raise the issue of global warming. Can you imagine? Since 1867, I believe, 1867, George Perkins Marsh, brought forth for the first time the issue of global warming, and many people didn't know anything about him. And so, and today, it's, you hear a lot of people saying that global warming is an established fact, it's a consensus. And I want you to hear what this astrophysician, you know, a great man that I really love to hear all the time, Professor Keaton, Brian Keaton, I believe, who spoke on the subject of science itself on the PragerU video. And I just want you to listen to him. And this will set the foundation of our show today.
I'm an astrophysicist at a major university. Science is my life. But when I hear somebody somberly intone, "Science says," or "follow the science," I get very nervous. Science doesn't belong to any ideology. Science is the never-ending search for new knowledge. That's what science means in Latin, by the way, knowledge. Not wisdom, not morality, not social policy. Knowledge. What we do with that knowledge is where wisdom, morality, and social policy enter the picture. Knowledge, it turns out, isn't so easy to come by. And sometimes what we think we know for certain, the Earth sure does look flat when we're standing on it, turns out not to be so certain. Of course I trust in basic scientific truths, those things for which there is overwhelming evidence, like, say, gravity, even that humans play a role in the warming of the planet. But scientists, even the best ones, can get things wrong. The brilliant astrophysicist Sir Fred Hoyle believed the universe existed in a steady state forever and had no beginning. But his view, once held sacrosanct by all astrophysicists, no longer holds. It's been superseded by the Big Bang theory that the universe had a beginning and is still expanding. In the 20th century, some of the most respected scientists in the world, including Nobel Prize winners, believed in eugenics, the reprehensible idea that the human race could be improved by selective breeding. The National Academy of Sciences, the American Medical Association, and the Rockefeller Foundation supported it. By the middle of the century, it had been thoroughly rejected as quackery. No reputable scientist would have anything to do with this idea. So, we all need to get over this notion that just because someone, be it a politician, a bureaucrat, or even a scientist, employs the phrase "science says," means whatever they're saying is right. It might be right, but it might also be wrong. And if it's wrong, it won't necessarily be a bunch of scientists who say it's wrong. It might be one guy. Ask Einstein. 100 scientists wrote a book explaining why his theory of relativity was wrong. He quipped, "If I were wrong, then one would have been enough." It takes a lot to convince scientists to accept a new theory, especially if that new theory refutes what they had always believed. In some cases, what they'd staked their entire careers on. As Richard Feynman, one of the most eminent physicists of the 20th century, famously said, "Science is the belief in the ignorance of experts." What Feynman is saying is that a good scientist should always maintain a healthy amount of skepticism. Science is by its nature provisional. Science would stagnate if we merely accepted proclamations of past authorities. So how do we do good science? This is not a new question. Since the 17th century, scientists have employed the so-called scientific method to guide their work. It's not a perfect guide by any means, but it's pretty darn good. The method involves 1. Formulating a theory. 2. Predicting the evidence that should be found if the theory is true. 3. Collecting data. 4. Analyzing the data. 5. Refining the theory and presenting evidence to other experts. The philosopher Karl Popper added one more item to this list. Popper said a subject is scientific if and only if it can be falsified. In other words, if your theory can't be tested, if it can't be proven wrong, it's probably not good science. This is just one reason why we have to be very careful about putting too much faith in models. They often can't be tested. Models are predictions of the future based on current data. They can easily get things wrong. First of all, the future, in case you hadn't noticed, is very hard to predict. And the further out you go into the future, the less secure the prediction. Second, the data may be incomplete or even erroneous. It's human nature to want definitive answers, but science can't always offer those. Furthermore, science is not concerned with fashion, authority, or majority opinion. Case closed is not a scientific expression. Science is never closed. If it was closed after Newton, you'd never have Einstein. Science has to be first and always about pursuing knowledge, not about advancing a social agenda, no matter how noble it might be. Science has no political party. Of course, politicians should use the best available science to help them make informed decisions. But remember, scientific knowledge is not the same as wisdom. As the saying goes, knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. So let's continue to look to science for knowledge we can use to improve the world. But let's not fool ourselves that science has all the answers to all our problems. It doesn't. That's one bit of wisdom this scientist can give you. I'm Brian Keating, professor of physics at the University of California, San Diego, and author of Losing the Nobel Prize for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video.
Everything that's reported on television isn't always true, but it should be. NTD, the power of truth. Now available 24/7 on television and streaming platforms.
Wonderful. I cannot have enough of Professor Brian Keating. I watched that video over and over. You need to go to PragerU videos and look for this video. Follow the science. It is incredible. It tells you exactly what's wrong with the science that we are seeing today. It's awesome and beautiful. I have another great video here. We're going to just watch a few minutes, probably 3 minutes of it, which is basically giving us one of the greatest wisdom that we should have in understanding everything, science and everything, it is called Why Dissent Matters.
Conventional wisdom is surely conventional, but it is often not wise. Lawyer and author William Kaplan argues we all need to listen more often to those unconventional voices, which may offer a lot more wisdom than expected. He lays out the case in his new book, Why Dissent Matters, because some people see things the rest of us miss. And Bill Kaplan joins us now here in the studio. Nice to have you here.
Thank you.
I want to start with one of the best examples in the book of why we need to listen to dissenting voices. And for that, I'm going to take you back more than 40 years. Israel is at war. And 6 years earlier, they had won a 6-day war, shockingly triumphant battle. And just 6 years later, they almost lost their entire country. Tell the story of why.
So what happened was, of course, we all know the story of the 6-day war. Israel was attacked by its enemies. They vanquished their enemies. They took over the Golan Heights. They took over the Sinai, and they were absolutely confident in their military superiority. And they developed something called the concept of Arab intentions. And basically what the concept was a guiding principle that informed the Israeli security and military establishment that Egypt wouldn't go to war unless Syria went to war, and Syria wouldn't go to war unless Egypt went to war. And they were absolutely convinced of this. Fast forward to October 1973, there had been all sorts of false alarms, belief that there may be an attack, and arms. The Syrians are amassing arms along the Golan, the Egyptians are amassing arms and men along the Suez Canal, but the Israelis held to what they called the concept of Arab intentions, that there wasn't going to be a war. Even when Soviet advisors began leaving both countries, they held to the concept. Even when military supplies began to come in, they held to the concept. They just wouldn't believe that it was going to happen. And they had some lower-level intelligence people who warned them, said this is about to happen. Moshe Dayan even said when he looked at the satellite photos, it's enough to give you a heart attack.
Huge miscalculation.
Huge miscalculation. 100,000 soldiers, thousands of tanks, armaments, artillery, and they just didn't believe it was going to happen. A couple of dissenting voices said, well, hey, take a look, just see what's happening on the other side of the Suez Canal. But they wouldn't believe it. The attack began. They almost lost the country, almost 3,000 casualties. It was a national tragedy. So what the Israelis did in the aftermath of this is they created something called the 10th man. And the job of the 10th man, it could be a 10th woman, a 10th person, is when everyone else says black, the job of that person is to say white, to ensure that a dissenting point of view is taken into account in security and military decision making.
So they have institutionalized dissent, where? At the cabinet table, in military circles, wherever?
Well, wherever. That was the idea. And that was the idea that first interested me in this book. I thought, what a great idea, because I know from my own professional experience, and just life generally, as we all do, that sometimes the best ideas come from the most unexpected sources. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're listening to people and at least considering what they have to say.
Why are we generally so resistant to the notion that the best ideas can sometimes come from that one person in the corner who is saying counter to what everybody else is saying?
Because the beliefs we have incredible endurance, and it's very hard to give up on our beliefs. And one of the examples I give in the book, of course, is equal marriage. And if you'd ask progressive people, say 40...
Awesome. Now, that's really a very powerful point there. How Israel almost lost their country after winning the 6 Days War. And I've never heard of that until I began to research on this show. And I was incredibly, really blessed hearing that always you shouldn't gather around yourself only the people who say what you want them to say. You know, you should listen to everybody, especially listen carefully to that person who sounds negative, because he could be right sometimes, you know. And so many scientists have always said that global warming is a settled matter. Of course, as we listen to Professor Brian Keating, there's nothing in science as settled matter. Science is open, and it's always open to question, you know. And 100 scientists wrote a book and said Albert Einstein was wrong. However, he was right. The most reputable scientists of his day said he was wrong. And I tell you, we need to listen to dissent. First of all, for a Christian, there is no prophecy in Scripture that tells us that the world will be destroyed by global warming. That's number one. Number two, if the earth was going to be destroyed by global warming, then the solution has to involve God. If it doesn't involve God, it can never be the solution. The current move of global warming and climate change and all the effort to solve this issue has nothing to do with God. They don't involve God. They don't even believe in God. Now, He created the world. I don't know how you're going to solve the problem of this world without Him. Now, someone may laugh at me. Well, you can go ahead and laugh at me. I am talking to Christians, and I'm a Christian. And I think we as Christians should never really get that. Look at the Scripture, either prophecy or any part of the Scripture, and see if there is anywhere in Scripture that says that the earth is going to be destroyed by global warming. I have never seen it. And if you see it, please, you can send us a mail. I will be glad to listen to. So now, so there is one particular, I would say, scientist who has argued against human-induced global warming, and he has been laughed at, he's been scorned at, but I tell you, he has stood his ground, and I am always impressed to listen to him. And he has a lot of reason, and I think that we as Christians should listen to him. So please, let's look at it.
And Malcolm Roberts joins us now from Canberra. Malcolm, I've got to ask, what is it going to take to convince you, if not the CSIRO, the United Nations, the Royal Society of the United Kingdom, American Institute of Physics, the European Science Foundation, NASA, and the 193 countries who've signed up to the Paris Climate Agreement? If not them, what is it going to take to convince you that human activities contributed to the warming of the planet?
Well, first of all, you've got to stop using appeals to authority. That means absolutely nothing in science. The only thing that decides science is the empirical evidence. That's the measured data, the physical observations, the hard facts. That's the only thing that'll matter, and that's the only thing that will convince me.
And you're saying that all of these institutions and organisations don't have empirical data, don't have hard facts, don't have anything of the kind?
But there's no physical evidence for that. There is no human cause of climate change. Full stop.
Senator Roberts, I've got a copy of your CV here from your company website, and it says you've basically worked for coal companies for most of your adult life.
I was interviewing Pauline Hanson, the One Nation leader, talking about climate change, at which point she directed us to talk to her climate change spokesperson, Malcolm Roberts. Well, he's here in the studio now, joining me for more. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Tom.
Just want to step through a few things in terms of your beliefs. So you maintain the Earth's not warming from more greenhouse gases from humans, that there's not a warming of the planet as a result of that?
That's correct, and not only that, there's no warming. In Australia, the temperatures in 1880s and 1890s were not only warmer than today, the heat waves are longer and had hotter temperatures.
All right, so I just want to step through the sort of logic of this. You do accept the fact that greenhouse gases trap more heat than nitrogen, oxygen and argon as well, the other elements of the atmosphere.
Carbon dioxide absorbs long-wave radiation, yes, but it doesn't warm the planet.
Well, but it does by nature trap more heat than those other parts of our atmosphere. You agree with that scientific element?
It doesn't trap heat.
It does absorb more heat.
In a bottle, in a sealed laboratory bottle, it traps more heat, but in the open atmosphere, it absorbs heat and then liberates it.
Well, if you don't get any heat at all, though, I mean, if we didn't have any carbon dioxide, according to scientific reports, it would be sort of -18 on the planet. So carbon dioxide has an element of making the Earth habitable in terms of heat.
Carbon dioxide has an element of making the Earth habitable in terms of it's essential for all life. That's for sure. But it doesn't cause warming of the Earth.
You don't think carbon dioxide warms the Earth at all?
Well, you see, there are a number of sources. First of all, there are some peer-reviewed scientific papers that say it cools the Earth.
Venus, for example, has a lot more carbon dioxide. It's about 400 degrees. That's an example of a lot more carbon dioxide, and as a result, it's a lot hotter.
And Mars, for example, has 97% carbon dioxide and is cooler than Earth.
So you don't accept carbon dioxide at all?
The Earth
is any contributor to warming?
That's what I was about to say. There are some scientists who say that carbon dioxide warms the planet. There are some scientists who say it cools the planet. The others, and the ModTran simulator is probably the best, it says that up to a certain level, I think about 100 parts per million, which is 0.01%, carbon dioxide is responsible for absorbing some heat and holding it. But above that, it's no effect. So
when you say above that, I mean, you're saying, what, even if it's 100%, there's no difference to heat?
I'm just going by what the ModTran simulator says, and that's had good results. So the other thing, Tom, is that the Earth has often been described by some people as a blanket. It's the complete opposite of a blanket. Because what happens is the sunlight hits the Earth's surface, warms the surface, whether that's the ocean or the parks or footpaths or roads, it doesn't matter what it is. The air touches that surface and then raises because it picks up the heat from the surface.
How do you, for example, explain the fact that satellites have measured at the exact level where carbon dioxide is a heating up of the Earth? How do you explain that, for example?
Well, there hasn't been, there's variation. The CSIRO, for example...
No, well, there's no variations on that. That's what satellites are.
No, there is variation. There's variation in everything in nature. I'm not the same height as you, for example.
That doesn't make sense. I'm saying at the level where carbon dioxide is, that's where heating's occurring. There's no variation on that. That's what satellites have measured.
The carbon dioxide levels are greatest near the Earth. It's heavier than air. It's 1.5 times the weight of air. So carbon dioxide is not evenly distributed. It's distributed quite unevenly around the planet.
Yeah,
for example, there's more carbon dioxide above the Amazon quite often than above heavily industrialized China.
But in terms of that, that's where the satellites are measuring it. That's where the hotter points are.
You've been led astray there somewhere, because we checked the NASA the satellites that are measuring carbon dioxide, and it's highly variable. It varies from as low as 300 parts per million, which is just 0.03%, to around 500 parts per million in other parts of the world. And it fluctuates on an hourly basis. I've seen the satellite data myself.
You're very focused in your Facebook posts on a relatively low amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So it's about 400 parts per million. And you're saying, how could this small amount make a difference? That's not actually scientific, is it, to just say, well, it's small, it doesn't make...
Explain why it's not scientific?
Well, OK, here's one. If you've got a billionth of a gram of radioactive polonium in a cup of tea, that's tiny. How could that kill someone?
Well, here's another one.
Hang on, but it does.
That's correct, because you're looking at a radiation effect. Now, if you look at another effect like arsenic, there's a chemical effect involved. A tiny amount of arsenic can kill you. But when we're looking at a physical effect, a tiny amount of an atmospheric gas, a trace gas, cannot affect it.
But you just say cannot. That's not based on science.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It is, because the empirical evidence states that the temperature is not increasing. And the other thing is...
That's not true, though. That's not true.
It is.
The empirical evidence doesn't suggest that it's not heating.
The empirical evidence shows that it was warmer, for example, in the United States in the 1930s and 40s. 70% of America's state records...
Let's go through
hang on, Tom, let me answer your question, please. The 70% of American states' record temperatures were in the 30s and 40s, have not changed.
That's not true either in an annual basis. That's not true. That's not true.
The record temperatures for American states,
that's a record,
70%.
Yeah, but you can pluck out individual days and
that was 30. That was in the 30s and 40s.
But most of the hottest years have come. A lot of the states have the hottest years, and I think it's something like 37 states have had their hottest years.
The hottest
since
year
the year
in America.
2000.
The hottest year in America for the whole state, the whole nation of America, 1930s.
The hottest,
hotter than today.
37 of the states have their hottest years since the year 2000.
As I just said, there's so much variation in nature, Tom. That nature.
But this is one of your core elements. You don't believe the Bureau of Meteorology when they're saying that Australia is heating up. You don't believe that?
Correct, because the Bureau only shows publicly in its graphs data from 1900 onwards, and it was very cool in 1900 compared with the previous years and the subsequent years.
Pre-1910, a lot of the measurements were so rudimentary they included thermometers in beer crates on outback verandas. You don't seriously expect that to be your so-called empirical evidence?
No, I don't.
Well,
but many of them were done in Stevenson screens, as they are now.
But there's as I just said, when you're saying let's see all the records from before then, they were too rudimentary, they weren't reliable.
No, they weren't, Tom. Some would have been that way, but some of them were set up by a very well-known, I think it was Rag, I can't remember the guy's name for sure, Rag, who did a phenomenal study around the world of the best ways to measure temperature, and the Bureau of Meteorology's early predecessors had a very good record.
Have you read the peer-reviewed Bureau paper on Acorn Sat2, the adjustment technique they apply?
No, I haven't, but I am aware of people who've criticised that and found glaring mistakes.
You're aware of people that have criticised it. You haven't read it.
No.
Why not?
I can't read everything. And quite frankly, I don't trust it.
You say the Bureau of Meteorology is falsifying information, but you won't read the methodology by which they change data.
We've found significant errors in that, and we're going to ask BOM. Stay tuned in Senate estimates.
Well, you haven't read the peer-reviewed paper on their adjustment technique, though.
But I've read other scientists' critiques of it.
Will you read the paper for yourself?
I may do.
Right.
But I have very little faith in BOM, by the way.
Let me walk you through an example of what the Bureau does. Kerrang, this is recently, in January of 2000, the measuring location was moved from the location in the town centre, that was near the post office, to a more open site in Parkland. Now, that resulted in a drop of overnight minimum temperatures, particularly in the cooler months. So what was done on those clear nights in particular, and they did this carefully, and it's shown on their website, an adjustment was made between 0.2 and 1.2 degrees on those nights. Do you understand why they've done that?
Yes.
Is that a fine methodology?
That's fine.
Right.
That's fine. What we need to then do is make sure that that amount was correct, and that's where the question comes in.
And that's what they're doing, and you haven't read how they've adjusted it and by how much by, but you're saying, I don't trust
I've read scientists, exceptionally good scientists, critiques of the BOM and found glaring errors.
You say exceptionally good. They've had it peer-reviewed, they've had it internationally peer-reviewed, they've also had the data published raw, they've also allowed the UK Met Office and NASA to look at it as well.
Tom,
they've said it's warming as well.
We've cross-examined the CSIRO on this. They presented a paper to us that was peer-reviewed, like many other papers. The one paper on temperature from them by Marcotte, 2013, and Marcotte himself, the author, lead author, said you cannot rely on the temperatures that he's presented in his own paper for the 20th century. What I'm saying, hang on, Tom, you've raised a critical point.
No,
what's happening is that the peer review is no longer adequate. It's not done properly. It's buddy review.
Well, based on what, though? That you pull out one name and you say this is wrong, and you've just said to me good scientists.
Yeah, Jennifer Marahasi, Bill Johnston, who worked in the Bureau, completely
Other adjustments that happen occur when large trees grow near a measurement station, if lawn is irrigated, or if it goes from manual to automated measurement. Are they all acceptable?
No problem.
So when you've previously said the BOM's manipulating data or changing it, you accept it needs to be changed. That's the nature of how this science works. I
accept that it needs to be changed in certain circumstances, yes. But one thing the BOM doesn't do, for example, they changed from the large Stevenson screen, which was recognised as the best for Australia's conditions, and they changed it to the small Stevenson screen. Now, they did not keep them going in parallel. They have no clue as to what the impact of that was. We know from Spanish papers, peer-reviewed Spanish papers, that when you change to a smaller Stevenson screen, it raises the temperatures recorded. The BOM has artificially inflated the temperatures.
Well, this is your claim. No, I'm not.
Dreams are potential seeds. They need someone to believe in them. They need someone to finance them. And they need someone to embrace them. Partner today with the World Mission Center, Abidjan, the Ivory Coast, and help us win Africa for Christ. Thank you so very much for tuning in and staying focused. We just can't, have enough time to look at the argument. In fact, once more, I would like Senator Roberts, he has held his ground quite. I am so amazed at the man's intelligence and the man's ability to speak without any carrying any paper. He has studied, sucked in the science. He understands what he's talking about, and his argument is basically simple: empirical evidence. In science, without empirical evidence, I don't care what authority speaks, it is not considered science. Empirical evidence is science, not what the authorities said, not what many scientists said in consensus. It is empirical evidence. Listen to him one more time, and then we'll look at other people.
Hello. Recently on Insiders, Malcolm Roberts gave Barry Cassidy his business card and asked Barry to get back to him when he had proof and data that there is a human element in our increasing climate change. I was hoping the panel could perhaps guide Barry with some fact and just not opinion on the human element in climate change.
I was going to start with Brian Cox, the scientist on the panel, and can you provide scientific data or evidence that might help Barry Cassidy convince Malcolm over here that human-induced climate change is a reality?
Well, yes, and I could sit here and read out figures until I'm blue in the face. I mean, interestingly, it's getting more worrying if you look at the temperature measurements now. I mean, 2015 and 2016 in particular have seen a quite shocking acceleration in many of the measures, be it surface temperatures, ocean temperatures, etc. So the first few months I noticed of 2016 have above the average, the pre-industrial average, have been pushing 1.5 degrees. Now, you can't read too much into individual years. You have to be careful because you see these graphs and they're spiky, but there's a clear rise. And
the latest data is actually suggesting that by 2024, 1.5 degree increase is on the cards now, which puts us very close to the critical 2%.
And that's a prediction of the models. But actually, in the early months of 2016 have already shown that. So we don't know how 2016 is going to continue. But that is a worrying problem.
Because? What would happen if we reach 2%?
Oh, there are some shocking predictions, actually, that you see where places in the Middle East, for example, that are already experiencing temperatures sometimes in excess of 50 degrees, I think, this year, become essentially uninhabitable for certain periods of time. So it exacerbates, sea level rise, etc. So what it does, it exacerbates some of the problems we're seeing. We just spoke about refugee problems. If you begin to get large shifts in climate very fast, then human populations have to respond. So how do you respond on very short timescales? One of the things you do is you move. So again, I emphasise it's the same answer as the answer to the last question, I think. This is now a clear global problem. The absolute consensus is that human action is leading to an increase in average temperatures. Absolute consensus. I know you may try to argue with that, but you can't.
No, not in my
But therefore, but the key point is, can we respond to it? Do we have the political institutions and the political will and the organisation globally to respond to this challenge? And that worries me immensely. I don't think we do at the moment.
I'm going to go quickly to Malcolm Roberts. We want to hear from all the panellists on this.
Sure. The longest temperature record for temperatures on this planet is the Central England temperature record, which goes back to the mid-1600s. And the latest in the 17th century, the latest warming cycle in the 17th century going into the 18th century was faster and greater than the latest warming, which finished in 1995. And Justin Bieber wasn't flying his private jet around in the 1600s. That's the first thing. The second thing was we've had a pause in this so-called warming for now 21 years. Depends how you measure it, 21 years. And I'm absolutely stunned that someone who is inspired by Richard Feynman, a fantastic scientist who believes in empirical evidence, is quoting a consensus.
Can I just say, I brought the graph, right? I mean, can I just... tell you where the pause is. The pause that's often quoted, there's if you take this point here, which is about 1997, I think, and you ignore 2015 and 2016, you can choose that point and you can draw a slightly straighter trend line on there. But that's a misunderstanding. The question is, does that rise? And also, secondly, I'd brought another graph, because I've heard it. Is it correlated with that, which is the graph that shows the CO2 emissions, the CO2 in parts per million in the atmosphere? And you see that peak there, where it goes flying up. So the question essentially is, first of all, are those two things correlated? And secondly, do we understand the physical mechanisms? And we understood those since the 19th century.
Brian,
I mean, I can teach you. I can give you a lesson if you want. I can give you.
Can you go back to the middle of the graph there?
Yeah.
That
graph.
Yeah, the peak in the middle.
Yep.
What year is that?
That's about 1941.
Yeah, 1930s and 40s were warmer than the current decades. Where's that?
Well, no,
what's the data source?
Well, not exactly.
No, the original records are.
I don't know whether we should argue about
The original records are far warmer. But the other thing that tells me that graph has got something wrong with it is that 1998 was about the same as 2015-16.
Okay, I'm just going to pause here. So you're hearing.
It was an El Nino year.
Both were El Nino years.
Malcolm, just 1 second. You're hearing the interpretation of a highly qualified scientist, and you're just saying, "I don't believe it." Is that right?
I'm saying two things. I'm saying two things. First of all, that the data has been corrupted, and we know that the 1930s were warmer than today.
Yeah. Corrupted? What do you mean corrupted?
Been manipulated
by who?
By NASA.
NASA?
Yes.
The people. Hang on a minute. No, so this is quite serious.
No, I'm going to just ask the audience, just hang on. We've actually got to hear what's being said here. So it's all very well to laugh, but we want to hear what's being said.
Steve Goddard, he has shown the NASA figures, and the graph was originally showing that 1930s were warmer than recent decades, and that is correct. And people have recognised that for many, many years. And in the recent years, they've been reversed so that the 1930s were reduced in temperature and the later periods were inflated in temperature. That's a fact. Now, the Bureau of Meteorology is exactly the same. And Greg Hunt squashed an investigation of the Bureau of Meteorology earlier this year.
Okay, all right, Greg Hunt.
Can I just check one thing? NASA.
Coleman is one of the co-founders of the Weather Channel, a former meteorologist for a number of years, decades, in fact. So he's obviously very worried about the climate. But what he's not worried about is climate change. Listen to his appearance on Fox News.
Man-made global climate change is a myth. How can you say that?
Well, it's very easy, but thank you for having me on your program. You know, a climate skeptic can rarely get on TV ever since Al Gore made it a plank of the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm. And they say you're Looney Tunes if you don't believe as he does.
You bet. And I've been in TV news organizations now for 60 years, and I only met 2 Republicans the whole time, and they were both hiding in the closet. I mean, this is a tough go for people who don't believe in climate change.
So John Coleman spends a lot of time in closets with Republicans. Anyway, sorry, needlessly throwing that in there. So we've got more for you, which we'll get to in just a second. I liked that TV is a plank of the Democratic Party, not MSNBC, but TV itself. And also that Megyn Kelly starts off by saying, how can you say that it's a hoax? So she's admitting that it is real, but then she turns around and says, but they call you Looney Tunes if you say that.
Right.
First of all, you just sort of said he was Looney Tunes for saying that. So which is it?
So she asks him, how can you say that? And he doesn't give her an answer.
No.
He just says, Al Gore's a jerk.
Exactly.
How can you say that? I don't know if you know Al Gore. That's how I can say it. That's it. That's their whole argument. It's his whole argument right now.
Al Gore's
right
a
now,
jerk, and there's no Republicans on TV.
And there's no Republicans on TV except, I don't know, I was watching MSNBC the other day, and Chris Matthews admitted he voted for George Bush. So even on MSNBC, you can't get away from right-wingers, okay? They're everywhere. How about Jonathan Karl? How about the guy...
Scarborough.
How about Joe Scarborough? Yeah, just come on. You have the #1 news network on cable is all Republicans, okay? Yeah. So again, it's just, I love it when white conservatives come on and complain about how they're the minority somehow in America.
TV. The world is thinking.
Again, intellectuals in society, there is a spontaneous demand from the larger society for the end products of engineering, medical, and scientific professions, but the demand for public intellectuals is largely manufactured by the public intellectuals themselves.
Yes.
Explain that. How do they manufacture demand for their own services?
Well, one thing is by making alarming predictions, offering solutions to our problems. And if they didn't do that, if Noam Chomsky had just kept on stating in linguistics, neither of us probably would have ever heard of Noam Chomsky. He would have been just as famous around the world among linguists, but nobody else would have heard of him.
What do you make of global warming?
I think it's a classic example of the need for crusades. Now, many people are shocked by these emails. I'm not at all shocked by them. I read the original UN study years ago, and I was just curious as to how they were going to deal with the question that the temperatures went up first, and then there was the increase in carbon dioxide.
Right.
Because you can't say that A causes B if B happened first. And so I read this, and I could see they were tiptoeing through the tulips and the way they phrased things and so forth. They couldn't confront that. And now we're finding out that they knew darn well they couldn't deal with all the evidence.
So it fits the pattern of a group of intellectuals, climate scientists, who have a very narrow competency, suddenly proclaiming that there's a crisis, scaring the rest of us, thereby creating a demand for their services, not as climate scientists alone, but as a kind of high priestly caste that can tell us all how to live and save the entire planet, and in the meantime generate billions of dollars worth of government programs to fund their research initiatives. And so it's a racket.
Yes.
All right.
But again, you have to...
Expert on all things climate and environment, as far as I'm concerned. A little bit of your background. You're the director of the Center for Study of Science at the Cato Institute. You hold an A, B, and SM. You hold those degrees in biology, sciences, and plant ecology from the University of Chicago. Pretty good school. PhD in ecological climatology from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, 1979. You're past president of the American Association of State Climatologists. You were program chairman for the Committee on Applied Climatology of the American Meteorological Society. Say that fast 5 times.
Yeah.
You were a research professor of environmental sciences at the University of Virginia for 30 years, and I'm giving an extensive, background that you have. I'm giving that to the public so they know you really know what you're talking about. And you're a contributing author and a reviewer of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. All right, let's get started. Climate change, global warming, global cooling, we've heard it all. What's going on out there?
Well, surface temperature of the planet is warmer than it was 100 years ago, about 9/10 of a degree Celsius.
9/10 of a degree Celsius.
That's all.
Is that a lot?
No, it's not a lot. There are 2 periods of warming, one in the early 20th century that could not have been caused by human beings because we hadn't put enough CO2 in the air, and one in the later part of the 20th century that either slows down or ends, depending upon whose data you use, somewhere in the late 1990s, only to resume with the big El Nino that covered the news over the last couple of years. So that means that probably about half, maybe half, of that 9/10 of a degree might be caused by greenhouse gases.
Everything that's reported on television isn't always true, but it should be. NTD, the power of truth. Now available 24/7 on television and streaming platforms.
What happened to the church? To the living, powerful, transformative, nation-shaking Christianity?
What they're trying to do is completely demolish Western civilization and then to rebuild it in a just society.
How do you break down American Christianity?
I think the problem today in our culture is many of our words have been co-opted and stolen,
and dumbed down and reversed.
Social justice is sold as something that it isn't. Critical race theory is sold as something that it isn't.
Whiteness has caused blindness of heart. Whiteness has caused blindness of heart.
When you preach victimization, it always leads to vengeance and vice. Us against them, me against you, I want my pound of flesh.
American churches today are where the universities were 10 years ago. Pretty heavily Marxist. They're not quite there yet, but they're well on the way. Many of the seminaries and Bible colleges are definitely already there.
That message that they're going out and taking the world is not, you need to repent of your sin, receive Christ. Instead, the message that you actually have is they are under the weight of racism or sexism or homophobia, and then we need to unify them together.
I'm gay, I'm 29, I'm a youth pastor in New Jersey.
I'm straight, and I'm also a youth pastor in New Jersey.
We're planning on sharing life together for the rest of our lives, which we're not totally sure what that looks like. Obviously, Nick.
Private properties are out the door, and everything is the state. They believe the state is God.
They don't define justice the same way as the scripture.
Oh, no. It's going to be an equality, all right. And it's going to be a totalitarian justice.
Thank you so very much. Go to enemieswithinthechurch.com and watch the movie, powerful movie that brings us to cleansing for the church. I'm David McQuell. You have been enjoying Global Impact. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time and same station. Thank you so very much for being around today. God bless you.
Science is never closed. If it was closed after Newton, you'd never have Einstein. Science has to be first and always about pursuing knowledge, not about advancing a social agenda, no matter how noble it might be. Science has no political party. Of course, politicians should use the best available science to help them make informed decisions. But remember, scientific knowledge is not the same as wisdom. As the saying goes, knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. So let's continue to look to science for knowledge we can use to improve the world. But let's not fool ourselves.